Hello and welcome back to World 360. Your news feed is probably bombarded with information about the budget, so let's bring you up to speed with the three big geopolitical stories of the week. First, we look at how the burning of a Quran in Sweden is hurting the Scandinavian countries' hopes of joining NATO. Second, we'll examine a new twist in the events of the Ukraine war, where the US has now accused Russia of violating the last major pillar of post-Cold War nuclear arms control. And lastly, we'll assess whether US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to the Middle East was a success or a failure. So let's get into it. You may remember that in April 2022, a far-right Danish-Swedish politician by the name of Rasmus Paludan burned the Holy Quran in Stockholm, triggering riots across the country. We had in fact covered it in a previous episode. On 21st January this year, the same man who seems to have an uncanny resemblance to Donald Trump burned a Quran outside the Turkish embassy in Stockholm for the second time.
Days later, he burned the Quran in Denmark.
Now, he has triggered protests across various Muslim countries. Since this incident, anti-Sweden protests have been erupting in Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Lebanon. This video is from Khost province in Afghanistan on 24 January, shortly after the incident outside the Turkish embassy in Sweden. And now, in what seems to be a tit for tat, protesters in Muslim countries have started burning the Swedish flag in protest. Here, Taliban supporters set alight a Swedish flag and waved it around as it burned. Here, young men in Turkey did the same. Now, as evident, flag burning or flag desecration is a powerful tool to protest against a country's foreign policy or the nature of the government in power there. Criticism of the way Sweden handled the situation poured in from across the Arab world, and many asked why the Swedish government didn't do enough to prevent the burning of the Quran, which was viewed as a provocative attack. Turkey, which criticized Sweden's permission of the incident, decided to cancel Swedish Defense Minister Pål Jonsson's upcoming visit to Turkey. To say this has increased tensions between Turkey and Sweden is an understatement. As we know, Turkey is a member of NATO, but has been blocking Sweden and Finland's request to join the bloc. As it is, on 18 January this year, a controversial protest by PKK supporters took place in Sweden, during which an effigy of President Erdogan was hanged from its feet. Turkey strongly condemned the incident and cancelled a visit by the Swedish parliamentary speaker. So it's safe to assume that by the time Rasmus Paludan burned the Quran for a second time in Sweden, Sweden and Turkey were already on thin ice. It's perhaps also safe to assume that the Swedish defense minister's now cancelled visit sought to smooth over these tensions, especially since the Ukraine war has hardened both Sweden and Finland's resolve to join NATO. So, where does Turkey now stand on Sweden's entry into NATO? 4 days ago, Turkish President Erdogan said for the first time that his country could accept Finland into NATO, but without its Nordic neighbor, Sweden. Keep in mind that after the Ukraine war began, Finland and Sweden decided to stray from decades of military non-alignment and applied to join NATO. So for one to be admitted and not the other would sting all that more. However, Finland has maintained that it would like to advance the membership process together with Sweden. In fact, a joint presidential and government committee on Finnish security and foreign policy recently said that the fastest possible realization of both countries' memberships was in the best interest of Finland, Sweden, and NATO. This was after Finland agreed to remove its de facto arms embargo toward Turkey in the hopes to curry favor with Ankara. It could very well be that by the time the next NATO summit takes place in July in Lithuania, only one of the Nordic countries will have a seat at the table. Now we look at how, in a new twist of events amid the Ukraine war, we're seeing documents from the post-Cold War era come back into focus. I'm talking about the New START Treaty, which is essentially a nuclear arms reduction treaty signed by the US and Russia, which entered into force in 2011 and is meant to last until 2026. The treaty calls for halving the number of strategic nuclear missile launchers. The New START Treaty, which stands for Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, was an effort by the US and Russia after the Cold War to ensure nuclear non-proliferation. So what has Russia been accused of violating in this treaty? Well, according to the US, Russia is refusing to allow inspection activities on its territory, which therefore prevents the US from exercising important rights under the treaty. Let's look at what the treaty says about inspection. Article 11 says each party shall have the right to conduct inspections at ICBM bases, submarine bases, and air bases. Inspection is also needed to confirm the accuracy of declared data on offensive arms. Inspections are also important to verify compliance of certain provisions of the treaty, such as the cap of 1,550 strategic nuclear weapons that either country can have. Now, since the Ukraine war, Russia hasn't been very open to inspections, blaming travel restrictions imposed by the US and its allies on Moscow. But Russia has said it is still committed to complying with the provisions of the treaty. In fact, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Wednesday, "We believe that it's crucial for the treaty to stay in effect, as it is actually the only one that remains, if not viable, at least hypothetically viable." For our last topic, we're looking at whether US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's recent visit to the Middle East achieved its objectives. Now, this was a video tweeted by Blinken about his recent trip to Israel and the West Bank. But a lot of the Arab media just aren't buying it. Take this headline by Arab News or this one by Al Jazeera. As we know, violence between Israel and Palestine has seen an uptick in recent weeks, especially with a recent shooting outside a synagogue in Jerusalem that killed 7 people. After this, Israeli forces shot dead a Palestinian man in the West Bank city of Hebron, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Blinken's visit, therefore, came at a time of this significant flare-up of violence. During his tour, he met Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah and called for a de-escalation of tensions, and he even criticized expansion of Israel's settlements. But it seems not even the Palestinian leadership were convinced of the US's approach to the conflict. A senior Palestinian official was quoted by Jerusalem Post as saying that Blinken did not carry any new suggestions from Washington. However, a recent report by US media outlet Axios claimed that Blinken did come to Abbas with a plan, specifically a security plan aimed at re-establishing Palestinian Authority control over the cities of Jenin and Nablus. According to the report, US and Israeli officials feel a decrease in the Palestinian Authority's security control is a key reason for the escalation in violence of late. But did Abbas agree to this plan? That's a question that remains unanswered. Thank you so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint.